Yeah, so for our next speaker, I'd just like to introduce Professor George Nash. He's going to be talking to us about Trellyffaint megalith. So George is an archaeologist and specialist in prehistory and contemporary art. He's also a convener of the Welsh Rock Art Organisation, and I hope I pronounced this university correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong. He is also the Associate Professor at the Geosciences Centre of Coimbra University, is it?
Coimbra.
There we are, you've said it there, in Portugal, and he's also the Honorary Research Fellow within the Department of Archaeology, Classics and Egyptology at the University of Liverpool. So I'll let you take over.
Well, thank you very much. Can you all hear me? The 1 and 6 pennies at the back. Excellent, right. Well, I'm a prehistorian, but I specialise in rock art, and there'll be a little theme of rock art going right through the lecture. But before I start, I'd like just to say a couple of big thank yous, because I always forget the acknowledgements at the end. First of all, to Louise Mees from CADU, who was very kindly sort of guided me through some of the ins and outs of the project. This project was actually done just before COVID and just after COVID, so you can imagine the misery that certainly I had to deal with when dealing with that epidemic. Also, a big thank you to the late Phil Bennett, who was been extremely kind and helpful to not just this project, but other projects we've done in this part of the world in the past. And also to the landowners, Pete and Barb, who gave us the permission, and damn good cake, I hasten to add. I'm afraid, I will say this in terms of my archaeological career and my diabetes type 1 has survived on good cake. So, so anyway, I'm going to be telling you a narrative, really basically the narrative of this excavation. It does go back a long way for me, way back into my undergraduate days when I was at Lampeter. And I was then under the arms of the great Chris Tilley, who recently died this year. And me and him visited this site when we were doing the research for his phenomenology book, which I hope most of you have got and read. What's interesting is, I'll just get the folklore out of the way. This is called the Toad's Hall Monument. It's got a little legend to it. And if you're a person wandering around there lost and unwanted, you'll get devoured and gorged up by that toad-looking face of that particular image of this particular monument. So I've entitled the lecture as the site, but more than just a megalith, because one thing I've started to work out, and I dare say Luke and Mike probably later on will be telling you about this, that when you start to look at the extant monuments around Wales, and there are an awful lot of them, usually you're just skimming the surface, forgive the pun, in that you start doing the geophysics around it, for example, or the LiDAR in particular, you start to find out or start to see a lot more things going on. And I think I'll get the sort of the geomorphology out of it first. A lot of the stuff that we couldn't see on the surface of this particular, or around this site, but we could see with the geophysics, is because of what we call the Aeolian deposition. These are very fine-grained sediments which are being blown up from the Irish Sea and then being dumped around this part of Pembrokeshire. And rather than the sediments following the contours of a disused site, for example, basically they were infilling that site. And that's the reason why when you walk around this particular site, because it's been ploughed as well, it's very much a flat surface. But when we did the geophysics, which I'll show you in a minute, it was quite a surprise. Now, one big rule I will say, and again, I think nearly all the people who have spoken today will probably agree with me, two things. First of all, the archaeological history of the site is sometimes as important as the archaeology itself. And what I mean is the people who've worked on these sites previously and the characters, some of them are characters, and some of the things they've had to do to get their results. That's one point. And the other point as well is that you never finish. I mean, I've looked at this particular site. This was just an evaluation, which I think I should hasten to add. So there is a lot more to do on there, and I think probably maybe even better geophysics. But anyway, without further ado, and as I said to you before, that the archaeologists involved usually have lots of stories to tell, and the theme with the Welsh Rock Art Organisation was we would study rock art in Wales, with the occasional, if we got the funding, to do excavation on sites where there was rock art. Surprise, surprise, this one's got rock art on it, so it was an ideal candidate. I'd also hasten to add that we had done work previously in a number of other spots around Wales, 2 or 3 up in Ynys Môn, Anglesey, North Wales, and also Arthur's Stone as well in Herefordshire, and a couple down in Pembrokeshire. And this is the team, and we'll walk away. This lovely lass here passed away about 3 months ago, and she was part of our team. We've been working, the Welsh Rock Art Organisation started off in 2004 in a youth hostel in Bangor. Plenty of drink, of course, typical archaeologists. And we've been going, I suppose, strong ever since, up until COVID, of course. The photograph you see on the far left of the screen is myself and the 2 geophysicists, Les and Phil, and we are continuing our work with the Welsh Rock Art Organisation. And basically, we're doing some work at the moment at Garreg Fawr, near the axe factory site up in Penmyr up in North Wales. So that's our latest project. But coming back down to where all this happens, this is part of what we call the Nevern Valley Group. And it's around about 7 or 8 monuments. Of the most famous one is Trellyffaint, of course. And again, one thing I want to stress here, which is really important, that all the Neolithic chamber tombs that you look at are really wimpy homes. And you're thinking, what am I talking about? If I bought a wimpy home up in Edinburgh, I'd be looking at the same dimensions, the same architecture as one down in Southampton. It's something which is repeated all the way through the British Isles and maybe in Europe as well. And what I mean by that, I mean generically that there are 5 major components to building a monument: a passage, an entrance, a facade, the chamber, and the mound. And if you want to include landscape as well, because again, if you look at the work of Chris Tilly, for example, he was looking at orientation, he was looking at how things stand in the landscape, the location, etc., etc. And you get all these components, put them together, jumble them up in any way you can, you come out with a chamber monument. And so in many respects, what we're looking at in some respects is regional identity, but also more importantly, as Luke has already pointed out in the previous lecture, we're looking at a time of 4,300 or 4,500 to around about 2,500 BC, a period of around about 2,000 years. And in that time, a lot of things can happen in terms of architectural change. So what you're going to find are idiosyncratic changes or themes based on those generic patterns or generic architectural traits that you see within the archaeological record. So I think it's an important point to consider when we're looking at these sites. And the Nevern Valley Group, so what we've got this is the Nevern Valley Group, and what we've got there are, I say, 8 or 9 monuments. And I've included in the bottom right-hand corner is a site called Trellyffaint, which is just a standing stone, but W.F. Grimes, the famous W.F. Grimes, looked at it in the 1930s and considered it to be a capstone belonging to a destroyed dolmen. And so that was one of our targets for rock art. You can just see the cut marks on the top of that. I'm going to call it a capstone. So we did a series of excavations there over about 4 or 5 year period and got some nice radiocarbon dates of around about 2,200. And I'm not too worried about the radiocarbon, the lateness of the radiocarbon dating, because I was just thinking about the monument, which is bottom left, which is Coton Arthur, which is in Newport. Sean Rees did an excavation there. You expect to have dates of around about 3,000, 3,500, but you got dates of around about 2,600, 2,800. So it's telling me that the monuments we're looking at are not just shoved up and then disused. They go on for generation after generation after generation, and may be in use up to 500 years or more in their history, their narrative. And then you've got the usual ones, the famous Trellyffaint, and the one next door to Trellyffaint is the one left one, which is, I've got to say this correctly, I'm talking in Cymraeg English, but it's Lecky's Ribbit, and you also got Cerrig y Goff, which is also around Newport. So, and they all seem to hover around the Nevern estuary and around the Nevern Valley. So there's an interesting landscape pattern emerging with these particular sites, which I've sort of taken on board. In terms of topography, what you see in the centre of the picture is where the site is. The site is quite interesting in that it's been the ground around it has been heavily truncated by a lot of agricultural use over the last 40 or 50 years. We were lucky with Trellyffaint, which is not too far from there, just to the south of, in fact, of that monument, where there'd been no ploughing going on, but here there had been ploughing going on, and that has an effect on the archaeology that's been retrieved. So when I decided to start to look at it, I was working with a team from Korean TV, as you do, and they were obsessed with cut marks, and so they were looking at comparative analysis of cut mark stones in Wales, Ireland, and guess where? Korea. And I will say, although I don't speak Korean, when they sent me the video, it was a highly polished piece of work. I mean, it's something out of a David Attenborough genre. So we looked around there, and this is what I started to think about the idea about doing some work here, because it had rock art on the capstone, and I'll come to that in a minute. I had been going there about 20 or 30 years previously as an undergraduate, as an interested visitor to the site. But it was really from that point onwards, around about 2015, I decided to make some sort of inroads to getting maybe running a project with this particular site. So this is what we've got in terms of where it stands within the landscape. It does all the things that, if you pick up Tilley's book of phenomenology and landscape or anything else he's done previous to that, it does all the right orientations for a dolmen. As you can see, there's very little evidence of a mound there, but take my word for it, there is the remains of in situ cairn and also loose cairn as well, suggesting that there is something going on there in terms of a mound, and it's more than likely that the mound is kidney shaped, as we found at Trellyffaint when we did the excavations at Trellyffaint. So again, very, very interesting in terms of its landscape position and the orientations that it sort of yields when you're looking at it from above in particular. So this is how it looked like when I introduced the team to look at the site. It was, one of them did say it was a confused pile of stone. But you can, from that confused pile of stone, work out what is actually going on. Quite clearly, and I'm going to try and be not too clever, but I'm hoping this is going to work. Oh, bugger. Right, okay. Oh, let's come back again. There we are. Take my word for it. On the capstone appears to have slipped off this one upright here, and surprise, surprise, the upright you can just see there peeking through. So the capstone has moved backwards. Now, that could be because of wear and tear over 5,000 years of standing in a Welsh climate, or it's been knocked accidentally by the farmer. And this is like we see quite a lot, that the problems we have with a lot of monuments, certainly within Wales, is that if they are in the middle of fields, they are prone to being accidentally knocked by plough damage, for example. If they're on boundaries, then they seem to be protected, which is again useful for people who are looking at monuments which are in boundaries or around boundaries. Whoops, come back. So looking at the historic mapping, and again, one thing I wanted to stress as well, the organisation for this, I decided to play the commercial role as an archaeologist to maneuver this project through by using what we call a staged approach. So the staged approach was basically a project designed, well, first of all, to express interest with the Ddiwrnod Archaeological Trust and CADU, and then to get in contact with the Pembrokeshire National Park, and that is where Phil Bennett came into play. But then also to produce a project design, desk-based assessment, and then do the preliminaries before we do any digging. And the preliminaries were basically geophysical survey, the actual survey of the actual monument itself, because I know it had been surveyed previously by Chris Barker, who did an excellent piece of work, and he published his invaluable book in 1992 on all the chambered tombs, lost, forgotten, and extant, and that's in that book. And also the work of Francis Lynch, who did a paper here and was published in 1972. And also not forgetting the work of W.F. Grimes. So it was quite interesting to look at, first of all, the land use. And the land use was useful because the people who run the farm now come from New Zealand. They came here in 2014. And so therefore, their knowledge about the land use only extends back to 2014. When we were working at Trellyffaint, which is a couple of kilometres to the south of this particular site, the guy Richard there, was born there, and his grandfather had actually bought the farm. So he knew when the site had been ploughed, or the area around the site had been ploughed. With this particular one, we had no idea about what was going on. So this is just some early imagery of. This is done by a guy called Edward Barnwell, who published in Archaeology Cambrensis, hooray. And this is the work of the Royal Commission. This photograph here is in the Royal Commission of Pembrokeshire. And this is from the good old Royal Commission up in Aberystwyth, which I downloaded. There's our site there. You can just see how close the ploughing has come to that site. So just very much a little island of archaeology in the middle of nowhere, a middle of a sea of ploughing. So taking that into consideration, it'd be interesting to see, in fact, which I did actually locate, when we did our excavation here, and I'll come to that in a minute, but we did pick up, bloody thing, we did pick up the plough marks, and I'll show you those in a minute. So it all kicked off around about 2017, 2018, when we started to do our first geophysical survey. We did 4 quadrants of 20 metres square, just to work out what was going on. And this is the interesting story. Same with Trellyffaint. We started to pick up a hell of a lot of features around the site. So quite clearly, the extant site can't be just looked at in isolation. There are other things going on there which are clearly happening before, during, and after the site was in use. And I suspect that the site, although we got a date for one of the features around the actual extant monument, I suspect that the site is around about 3,500 BC and probably still in use for about another 500 or 600 years thereafter. And we also set up as well using sort of high-resolution contour survey. We did a contour survey of the landscape, and guess what? Flat as a pancake. There's the site just before we started to put in some interest, express an interest to at least to start to record the cut marks on top of the capstone. Oh, damn it again. There we are. So it's on that face there. This is what attracted us there in the first place. And what was interesting is that Barker and people before him, so before 1992, there was a claim that there was about 35 cut marks plus on the capstone. And just remember that Chris Barker's rationale for his project was to look at the architecture of the monument and also to record the previous histories and the comments made by antiquarians. So that was his rationale. Our rationale was actually to record accurately using acetate at the time and also photogrammetry, the cut marks on there. We counted around about 75 plus. So there's a lot of things going on there on that particular panel. And as I said to you before, this part of the capstone was actually on those 2 uprights there at one point, methinks. So, and also with this particular monument as well, it's not just the main chamber, but there is another side chamber or some form of structure next door to it. Again, couldn't quite work out what was going on. These are the cut marks. So we tend to look at the cut marks in the evening and use oblique lighting to take the photograph. So we've got a photograph of the whole capstone, but I just wanted to put this picture up just to show the relevance of the cut marks. And what is quite interesting is I run these I passed people who study astronomy, and because my view is that nearly all the cut-marked stones related to Neolithic chambered tombs are on the capstones. There's very, very few monuments that have cut marks on uprights. They're usually on the upper face of the capstone facing upwards. So me with my sort of, I suppose my psychedelic head on at the time, considered the idea that they may represent star constellations. And I think talking to Tilly about this when I was working with him in Sweden back in the early 1990s, he had a similar sort of view that this is some form of way of venerating the overworld as well as the underworld. The underworld is the archaeology that we're digging up around these monuments and underneath these monuments, but there was also probably some form of religious ideology that dealt with the stuff above. And I think this is what we're looking at here, these celestial maps being created on the capstones. And again, for those of you interested in statistics, it's around about 12% of all Welsh monuments have some form of, so far that I know of, rock art directly associated with monuments, and only 9 monuments in the whole of Wales that have cut marks actually on their capstones. So quite clearly, there's something special going on with this particular monument. It could be there could be a sort of fad going through the Neolithic world at that time to apply some form of marking. We don't know what the marking represents, but again, another little factoid to think about is that we have cut marks on Iberian monuments. We also have cut marks on Swedish monuments, and in between, cut marks on all monuments, on all types of monuments from the Neolithic, suggesting that there's a universal recognition of what a cut mark might represent from Spain, Portugal, from the Iberian Peninsula, right through to actually southern Norway. There's a couple of sites there with cut mark sites. So it's an interesting thing to think about. It's very much a Atlantic facade sort of thing going on. So this is an image of the capstone looking down. And what I've done painstakingly, I've put all the cut marks in red. This in many respects, this slide and the light doesn't show it, give it that the credit it's due. But that's what the site looks like with my colleagues looking around. And again, from that, you can just about see the stones sticking. This is this additional chamber, which, if it is an additional chamber, it would have had a capstone over it. And take my word for it, there is a stone there. There's a stone there, and there's a sill stone or a threshold stone there. So more than likely, what we're looking at is probably could be a double dolmen, similar to the one called St Elvis, which is down near Manorbier, to think about. So there's a possibility that this is the main chamber, but at some point during its history, maybe because of extended family clanage or whatever, they've added a secondary chamber on there. But again, there's been no excavation on any of this site. And we didn't actually excavate the site. We excavated features to the north of the site. So we still don't know. But so from a bird's eye view, let's go back one. So what we did was we got the landowner very kindly lent me his tractor. This is not a drone. This is before drones. Lent me his tractor with a big tipper truck on the side with a grid around it. I'm just warning all those health and safety people who's going to have a go at me. And we peered down, and this is what we got in terms of the monument. Note the scale. It gives you an idea. This is a meter scale, so it gives you an idea of the size. And then we started to sketch it out, but more importantly, we started to use photogrammetry to try and tease out the edges of the mound. So you can just see the mound, which is in white. So that was really, in some respects, it provided a really good update of Barker's drawing, and also the one that was published by Francis Lynch in 1972. And there's just a sort of side-on polished plan of that site and Chris Barker's. And they're very much the similar thing. But again, I hasten to add, we were more interested in the structure of the loose stuff and the stuff around the actual chamber itself, and obviously the rock art, more so than Chris. And Chris was really a rapid survey to get what he wanted out of the project. Also did some other work on it, did some photogrammetry from the side, get some idea of the view. Again, this is very, very rudimentary stuff because obviously now the technology's moved on, but this is an actual animation which you can do a 360 around it. But again, some very interesting, these are just stills from it. And then we started to look at the geophysics. And again, it doesn't do it much proud, but take my word for it, there are two circular anomalies coming up here, one there and one just down here coming around. And we decided to do an excavation in this area here. We did 2 trenches, and I'll come to those in a minute. But it just gives you an idea about how we should not take for granted in any shape or form when we're looking at an extant Neolithic monument that what could be lying underneath either side or around those monuments, or underneath it, in fact, in many respects. So just one thing we need to consider when we're looking at these particular sites. We decided from that initial geophysical survey to extend the site. And again, just put you in the picture, these here are the extant monument, but you can see there's a track here. It could be modern, we don't know, but it just tells you that we are dealing with some very, very complex below ground surface potential archaeology. I say potential because obviously we've all been led down the rabbit holes when we're looking at natural features. We have to be very, very careful about how we do these interpretations with geophysics. So April 2017, year 2, we start to think about the idea of doing the geophysics. So I'll just quickly whip through those. There's our geophysical team. And as I said to you before, we did 4 quadrants, then we extended to 8 quadrants around the monument. We're using magnetometry and resistivity just to see what we could find. We noticed that the ground was very, very wet. The ground was flat. The ground had been ploughed in the 60s. That's the area that we're going to concentrate our work in year 3 for the excavation. And we decided to do 2 trenches, only small pinhole trenches. Remember, this is an evaluation, so we're evaluating what is there. Not so much we're doing full excavation. The full excavation will come at some point in the next 40-odd years, as long as I draw breath. But hang on, let's first see what happens. And as you can see, the wonderful thing about doing sort of rural archaeology, and when you're looking at the Neolithic, and I dare say, we've seen that with the previous lecture from Luke, is that the stratigraphy is quite shallow, which I quite like because I'm an old git and I don't like digging I get a terrible backache. But as you can see there, we're starting to pick up some really interesting anomalies from the initial trench evaluation. You can just see there as well, there's a lovely line there. And this is the plough line, which was made in the 1960s. And also I would argue that we've hit here the actual Neolithic landscape. So that there, we were picking off pottery there and flint. And now pottery is really quite interesting because, as it's always been expressed by Luke earlier, that this part of Wales is naff well, it's great for acidic soils, but naff for preserving things like pottery. And so we were quite surprised to pick up very, very friable, very small fragments of pottery, but nonetheless, it was pottery and it got bagged up. And we found stuff in both trenches. And remember, we're digging on the cusp or the corner of one of those henges that I was talking about from the geophysics survey. So it's a targeted excavation. There's nothing random about it. We've deliberately picked those 2 trenches to run over that anomaly of that possible henge monument. And again, these 2 features here are probably the most important we came across. In this particular trench here, we did pick up the line of the henge, which seems to come round like this. And I'll say it's going around a diameter of around about 12 meters. So it's quite a sizable feature. It's similar to the features which are being found at St Breville's, which is not too far from there, by Toby Driver with his aerial photography. So again, there's some interesting patterns emerging in terms of what you would expect to find on a Neolithic site that you can't see, which is obviously subsurface. So there's our plough marks. You can just see the plough marks coming down here. So it's just what we wanted. So it fits in nicely with that Royal Commission aerial photograph of the site being ploughed. And if you go there today, it's hedgeless. There's no sort of major sort of medieval, post-medieval features that you expect to find in a field, the normal field of around Newport. So it's nearly all the hedge or the original field boundaries have been removed over the last 100 years. And it's now used for dairy farming. So there's no need to plough it. So there's our team working hard. And what was really lovely, we put an advert out on Facebook, of course. And we got replies from Canada and America. So we had 2 Americans there, 1 Canadian, plus some Welsh people came along for the fun of it. We had a great time. Stayed at the local youth hostel in Newport. Recommend it. And so these are the features we're looking at, and I'll come to these a little bit next. Yeah. So this is the first feature. You can just see the clear circular feature of what we was thinking would be a deep pit, but actually it was very, very shallow indeed. And these stones were, again, very interesting. We sort of kept them back for analysis. I was quite interested in to see what the geology was all about. And that's what they looked like when we'd done the full excavation, well, the evaluation. And so that's feature 2. This is the feature 2 being fully excavated. We took the decision, although we probably should have we did half section it, but because of the shallow nature of it and the potential of any future agricultural regime that might be there, such as ploughing, we decided to fully excavate it. And I did inform Louise Mees from Canada that we were going to do that. And we got from there about 36 pieces of pottery, we think, from the same pot. The pottery is now being analysed, and it has gone to the National Museum of Wales. So they own it now. It's their acquisition. And we also found a lot of flint as well. Again, saying I would not expect to find around a chambered monument itself or inside a chambered monument, but outside the sphere of that ritual activity, you start to find some quite nice diagnostic stuff. And we found a few diagnostic flints, but also a lot of debitage as well. And these are my 2 American colleagues proudly showing their finds that they've excavated. The one thing I wanted to do was, when we did that pit, feature 2, this is where it gets really quite interesting, is that the pottery, 36 pieces or 36 sherds, probably belonged to one pot. When I got hold of it, first of all, I told the team not to wash it, clean it or anything. We would take the pottery out wholesale, very much like we would sort of give a chance for it to be excavated in the laboratory rather than on site, because I was interested. I had actually worked out about the idea of preserving the residues of the pot, if there was any residue there at all. I had no idea at the time. So I have colleagues at Bristol University who work in the Department of Chemistry. I taught at Bristol for 19 horrible years. Another story, another bit of archaeology. And the Department of Chemistry, coincidentally, one of the people I used to teach had got a PhD in pottery analysis, just what I wanted, really. And she was working with a team with a guy called Professor Richard Evershed, who have been working on a new idea of dating. So you got your AMS dating, your radiocarbon dating. They could actually date the lipids, and we were one of the first projects for lipid dating or lipid analysis. So we're going to have lipid analysis anyway, but they said, "Hey George, for a beer, we'll do you a date on that as well," which is just what we wanted, really. So there's our date. Our date is around about 3,100. So it fits lovely within that sort of Neolithic. I don't like using the word middle Neolithic because Bradley's beaten it out of me. But anyway, that middle part of the Neolithic period, around about 3,100 BC, it fits nicely with the work that Steve Burrows has been doing at the National Museum of Wales, where he's been looking at dating of bone and pottery up, certainly in North Wales. So that 3,000 mark BC was a really nice date for me. And this is the pottery we got. I sent it off to Rick Peterson to have a look at. He said grooved ware. I went along with it. Still happy with that. Nearly all of it was decorated. So that's a nice bit of pottery. You just see there the residues that are coming through over the pot. And when they looked at the residues, they managed to suggest that they were dairy products, probably cheese or yogurt. So that's really good news. I only wish there was a little bit of apricot in there. I'll probably hold them back and put them in my fridge. But anyway, so this is what we've got in terms of the pottery. And as I said, it's a story in its own right. It's just a lovely sort of a way to end a project, to find that sort of material in an area which is traditionally known as a very, very acidic soiled area, where the pH values are so miserable that it'll just eat away anything like bone or pottery. But this stuff was really in good condition. I only can suggest, and again, it's just an interpretation, that the pottery was probably put in some full leather pouch, and maybe the tannin of the leather created a chemical barrier between the acidic soil and the pottery itself. The pottery was very much in a clump, very similar to the photograph that Luke showed earlier on with his pit. And again, I was just thinking when he was talking about the pits that he'd found there, very, very similar to what we've got here. And I dare say there's other parallels as well to think about. So that was really quite exciting. And then what we all good archaeologists should do, but sometimes don't, we had to I hate returfing, but we returfed. And now the site, if you went there now, you wouldn't even know where it is. So anyway, so that's where we are with Trellyffaint. Just to let you know, in terms of as an MB note, I am going to be looking for another site. I'm looking at a site called White House, which is down towards St David's Head. I'm going to be looking at that maybe tomorrow or Monday, with a view of just starting the preliminaries of doing the research, doing a desk-based assessment, see what we think we may have there. It's a really interesting monument in that Farmer Giles, bless him, has decided to upend the capstone and stick it on its edge between two uprights. I love it. It could make it up. So I'm going to be looking at that at some point in the near future. But in terms of Trellyffaint, for the moment, the site is closed. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.